But this was might reply to us and say, look, I'm not claiming that this intuition, in fact, actually gets at the real moral character of these actions. I'm not making that claim at all. I'm not claiming that rights should be overridden in cases of utility, or that character judgment should overrule our sense of justice. What I'm claiming is there's a significant number of people who find this to be a compelling and justifying intuition, and that's the real world that we live in. So we might think, okay, fine. We're not even going to suppose that we can adjudicate the intuition itself as being correct or one that is misleading and should be dismissed. I've kind of tried to make a case that it is misleading and should be dismissed, but I'm not requiring that you agree with me on that. Let's just go with Dershowitz on this. Does that finish the argument? Well, not really. All right. Suppose that we think that in cases like the ticking bomb, where thousands of innocents are saved at the cost of torturing a single bad agent, that action is morally correct, or at least it's neutral. Or suppose we just say, look, enough people have that intuition strongly enough that it can create, a movement towards that policy or that action, so that it's hard to effectively ban torture. That's the place of this argument, right? So suppose we grant that without deciding whether or not we think the intuition is misleading or insightful. The next question we're going to have to ask then is, all right, well, how does this hypothetical case relate to the real world and to the potential policies that we might adopt within the real world? Remember, this is a very highly constrained hypothetical case. Gets this intuition. How does that intuition translate to real world policies? Sorry about that. So the first question we're going to have to ask then is, well, we've got that intuition in the ticking bomb cases, so how common are ticking bomb cases in real life? And this doesn't bode well for Dershowitz, because when we start to think about the details that are necessary in the ticking bomb scenarios, it requires this astonishing confluence of events. Okay? So there's going to be a terrorist attack really imminently, and we capture a terrorist, and that terrorist has the information that we need in order to stop the attack. And we know that that terrorist has the information we need in order to stop that attack. And when we torture that terrorist, they give up that information, and they do so in a right amount of time. They don't die before they give it up. They don't give us misleading information just to get us to stop. We get the right information in a short period of time, and then we're able to act on that information, and the result is all these people get saved. That's a lot of things to happen just in the way they need to in order to get that utility calculation out. So how many times does that happen? Well, I looked at the literature, and I read some people who've looked through all the claims about this. And so, for instance, when you look at Laban, the guy I quoted in the terrorism brief at the end, right, he goes through and he talks about the sort of best case examples that are brought up and shows that each of them are in fact false. They're not actually the case that they're purported to be. They didn't really happen that way. They're not an instance that resembles the ticking bomb scenario at all. And so the consensus seems to be that there is no single instance of a ticking bomb case that's been reported and verified anywhere in the literature. And so if we're thinking, well, how often is this intuition going to have impact in the real world? If we're tying this intuition to this particular scenario, the answer is little to none. What sort of policy should we adopt? The policy of when the incredibly uncommon thing happens, then we can worry about it. And that's not actually the policy option that Dershowitz considers. The policy options that Dershowitz considers is that we do stuff covertly or, off the books in the way that was done in the early 2000s, which is not anything like the ticking bomb scenario. Or that we come up with this notion of a special warrant that allows for judicial review and clarity of oversight and so on. But all of those policy examples, they really implicitly assume that there are going to be enough cases that those institutional mechanisms need to be created to deal with them. And they'll be capable of dealing with them in a way that gets it done. So not only are we going to have to train torturers, because you have to know what you're doing to torture well, you have to make sure that you don't kill somebody before you get the information out of them. But we've also got to write all the codes about it. And we've got to get judges and then panel those judges, and we've got to maintain that whole system. All for these events that so far we can't say we ever had one of. And so that looks problematic. All right? Even if we say that intuition is robust and it's had by many people, if there aren't cases of it in the real world, that intuition doesn't seem to apply. But maybe we can take another step and say, well, look, actual ticking bomb cases look extraordinarily rare. But, and when we look at the historical practices, cases where torture have occurred, like in 2003, or, just like talk about Israel, right? Those practices, they just don't seem to have that kind of structure to them, right? So torturing people in Iraq, trying to get information about domestic terrorism that's imminent, right? That's pretty futile. But maybe we could extrapolate from these cases. We could talk about the value of selective torture, because it would overall reduce the number of terrorism acts on the long run and create a greater good for a greater number. Now, it's going to change the utility calculations a lot, right? If we just looked at the practices in 2003, a lot of people got picked up on rumors and suspicions and tortured because of it. And a lot of people are still in Guantanamo. A number of people are still in Guantanamo, never going to be charged, never going to be released, who were tortured, and we got no actionable intelligence from them. So we want to try and figure out, can we sort of generalize a policy of torture that has sufficient gains over the torture and the negative parts about it, that we get what we consider from an intuitive perspective to be comparable results.